Hey everybody on YouTube, good afternoon. Okay guys, we are finally done with the Sony Bvw-70. It's a Betacam SP. These are a very difficult machine to work on, especially if they've been sitting for a long time, because these have a lot of problems, guys. If you don't use these Betacam SP decks and they sit for a long period of time, you're at risk of lubrication drying out like a rock. And there's a lot of lubrication in parts on these things, in the motors, in the guides, in the swing arm, everything. If lubrication gets hard as a rock, it gets to the point where you just can't fix it and you have to actually change out or replace the parts. Especially in case in point with the motors in this thing. The two drive motors left and right have bearings. The grease got really hard and these motors started spinning slowly and kept throwing the tape around the spindles, and it started going into severe error codes. So the motors weren't spinning freely because the grease is like a rock in these things, and and when that happens, you have to replace the motors, because if the lubrication goes bad on them, you have to change them out. So we had to change both motors on both sides, okay, and that took care of major error problems. Then after that, we changed the swing arm, which we had to totally replace, and usually you could fix them, but in this case this one was broke and it was locked in place and I had to change it out. Also the mechanism, the drive mechanism for the ring was hard as a rock. I had to take that completely apart and try to get that freed up and rebuilt so it's working properly. Okay, the loading motor was all gooked up from sitting for God knows how long, and that wouldn't move freely. Okay. And you have your plunger motor, or your plunger. It's a mechanism for locking the plunger in. What happens is it pulls in and it pulls your capstan roller against your motor drive, and it's like an actuator type of thing. And that was starting to stick due to age and sitting around and not being used. We had to do a complete tear down and rebuild of this unit, guys. This is probably one of the worst ones I've seen in a long time. Not because it was abused and it was used. It's probably the worst one I've worked on in about a year, because the thing wasn't used at all. It was sitting in this case probably for a long time. And when that happens, everything dries out on them. And plus if you're in a bad environment, like a Midwest environment, or even an environment like Florida, South Carolina, any of those areas are very bad on these machines. It's very bad climates. And these machines, they start to dry out. Things inside them start to dry out, and of course, the capstan roller had to be changed out. The belt had to be changed out. This thing, like I said, this thing had a lot of problems due to the fact that it wasn't used. It's been sitting around for a long time, and that causes severe error codes. On top of it, the entire loading carriage was completely screwed up. I had to take all the parts off on this thing and get the sensors working right. There's actuators on the sensors that dry out due to the greasing and lubrication, which was hard as a rock. So I had to take the loading carriage out, rebuild the loading carriage, take the spindles off and re-grease them, and put everything back together again with the proper alignment of the sensors so this thing would stop throwing error codes. You had about 7 different error codes on this thing. The spindles, the loading carriage, the swing arm, and the motor drive. There was like 7 different error codes that were coming up, and that's just because the lubrication on the deck was completely screwed up. I had to buy a brand new swing arm. I had to fix the loading carriage, which was completely screwed up. The spindles were dried out and they weren't spinning at the proper speeds. This thing was a nightmare, guys. I mean, this has been about 4, maybe 5 day complete teardown. I mean, I had to actually take everything apart and tear this thing down completely just to get the thing to play. I mean, this thing is a freaking nightmare. So as you can see, when you hit eject, all right, here's your eject. You got no error codes. Right now, I'd be going to error codes like crazy, even if it could load. And before, it wouldn't load at all. So see, it loads, drops the tape in place, and there you go. Boom. All right. So that's for the large shell. This thing wouldn't play small shells at all. I mean, this loading carriage was completely screwed up. So here you go with the small shell, which is supposed to do this. It's supposed to take it right in. Now it does. I mean, this thing was a complete nightmare because of sitting around. The worst thing you guys can do is not use these things, because of if you don't use them. And that's the worst thing in the world you can actually do, because not using these decks and keeping them in cases like this in bad climates, you know, if these are not in machine rooms and quality control machine rooms and TV stations and such, it kind of keeps that problem from happening. But like I said, guys, when grease locks up on these things, when the grease gets all dried out, it doesn't want to function. This is one of the worst decks due to the fact that it has a swing arm. And the swing arms on these things are not very good at all, because, you know, you're looking at aluminum on solid stainless steel pins on these early mechanisms like this. It was a very bad design. That's why Sony got away from it. You know, they started doing it on the UVW 1800s and stuff. They got away with using that swing arm and the parts that were pressed into aluminum fittings due to the fact of the failure rate, which was quite a bit. So, anyways, guys, this was an awful lot of work, a lot more work than was supposed to be done. But, you know, I just have to let the client know and get him to, you know, get me a shipping label so we can start shipping this back to him. But I'm going to have to charge him for the extra parts that I had to get due to the fact this thing was in very, very bad shape. But as you can see, we got it working really good now. So that's the best part about it all. And, you know, it's the whole part is to get this thing to work right. When you can get this to work right, okay, you have a deck to be able to do transfers, conversions. I think they're gonna be doing a lot of tape transfers. I think this is from a TV station, but functionality wise, we got it back and running. So I hope you enjoyed this video.